Welcome to the Oracle Scroll. My name is Kevin Walder and I am your host, and I invite you to join my guests and myself as we discuss all things metaphysical. Welcome back to episode 7 of the Oracle Scroll. Today we take a look at the Hierophant, card number 5 in the major arcana of the tarot, and we'll take a look at the future and what we can expect going forward in this newly fragmented world that we've inherited. And finally, in our last segment, we will answer a question from Robert, who is an audience member who sent in a question for us to review with tarot. So let's jump right in to the Hierophant. The Hierophant. In some older decks, this card is called the Pope, and the artwork supports that understanding of the authority and respect commanded by the Hierophant. Some more modern decks have undertaken to update the imagery and entitled the card by various names, such as Faith, and other means of including other traditions. In many ways, this card addresses our need for safety and comfort without compromising our freedom of spirit. The Hierophant then becomes a mirror for us to examine our own individuality, strength of resolve, and integrity. When we encounter hard times or challenges that seem beyond us, this institutionalized authority is of particular comfort. Like the bowl of chicken soup when we're feverish, having the support of a system which shares responsibility with us is very soothing, sometimes necessary. At other times in our lives, when we are embarking upon a new adventure, attempting to establish our own identity, this very same institutionalized authority can become burdensome and difficult. Just as this traditional authority provides order in chaos, it can feel at the same time very limiting and unnecessary. One thing that makes this card particularly relevant at this point in history is the work that is going on currently in the Vatican, as this very rigid and authoritarian system of governance is being challenged from many angles, even from the Pope himself, acknowledging that change may be necessary for the survival of the body as a whole. What we are witnessing in the news is that very polarizing effect we spoke of earlier, and the need to keep the good, the comforting and uplifting, while relaxing some of the rigid and restrictive rules and laws. When this card comes up in a reading, it's a strong indication that there is a strong relationship between the querent and the authority figures in their life. The other cards in the reading will provide insight as to whether this relationship is positive or challenging. The Hierophant can also indicate that the querent is actively involved in creating their own traditions and practices, which will have greater meaning in their personal life. While the traditional understanding of the Hierophant is one of spiritual and religious tradition, this card can also speak of other traditions in one's life. For example, if one were to embark upon a career simply because a parent had enjoyed success in that career, this would set one up for disappointment, disillusion in the future. I am always curious to see what new questions come to the fore in a reading. I'm convinced that better questions only lead us to better analysis. When you see the Hierophant, does it feel comforting, open, and warm, or cold, calculating, restrictive? How has the polarizing effect of the Hierophant influenced important decisions in your own life? Have you devised a way to enjoy the comfort of tradition without compromising your own individuality? The preceding was lifted directly from my book, Tarot for Lunch, Lessons from the Cards, now available on Amazon.com in both paperback and Kindle versions. And now, in keeping with what we've been doing with each card, I have written, it's sort of an interview, I guess, with the Hierophant as much as we can. I wrote it as an audience with the Hierophant. So let's explore a little more about this character. First of all, you're going to hear from the announcer that's welcoming you to the facility. So prior to your visit with the Hierophant, you will want to review the handbook you received in your admission packet to make certain that your attire and your demeanor are appropriate to the occasion. Failure to do so may result in the revocation of your invitation. Please arrive 30 minutes prior to your appointed audience and be prepared to stand for about 90 minutes. All accommodations due to disabilities should be arranged at least 6 months prior to your audience. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my supreme pleasure to present to you His Eminence, the Hierophant. Welcome to today's audience. I want to speak briefly about our heritage within this holy construct and how this high office continues to evolve as human consciousness continues to expand. In the earliest editions of the Tarot, we were known as the Pope, and we were depicted in the robes of state and carrying the shepherd's crook and crucifix most commonly associated with this high office. In later versions, the name associated with this office was changed to the Hierophant, and for the most part, that designation continues now, though some artists and authors have chosen to change the name to be either more inclusive of other faiths or more focused in a particular tradition. By way of history, it bears noting that this office was once the supreme law throughout the Western world. Kings were required to seek the approval of my predecessors for their decisions, and even territories were won or lost by the stroke of a pen at this very desk. Though this office is most commonly thought to be a religious one, there is considerable political power bound to it as well. As Hierophant, it is our job to be the supreme intercessor between the earthly and the heavenly, to have the ear of the higher power and to be the mouthpiece for said higher power here on earth. One title associated with this office is Pontifex Maximus, which is Latin meaning the greatest bridge builder, which alludes to the power of bridging the worlds. Throughout history, the holder of this office has been both deeply loved and despised. Many times my predecessors have met with untimely ends or have been physically attacked even while being surrounded by throngs of adoring faithful. We are accustomed to being the focus of intense emotion, whether positive or negative, as it is the nature of this office. As Hierophant, we stand for centuries of tradition and authority, and though the reach of the office has changed over those millennia, there is still a great deal of political power which emanates from these ancient walls, and ignoring that fact will imperil any political aspirant who dares discredit or ignore our influence. The foremost function of the office of Hierophant is to serve as a teacher, one who will impart the wisdom of the highest power in the universe in a firm but compassionate fashion. This office exists to maintain traditions which have been handed down through centuries of refinement and improvement. As teacher, the Hierophant imparts each student an appreciation and respect for the traditions which have served the community as a whole. The Hierophant is associated with the Hebrew letter Vav, which means nail, as if fastening together the important lessons of this world. In the runic alphabet, I'm associated with the rune Rad, which means journey, as in the journeys undertaken between this world and the next. Astrologically, the Hierophant is associated with Taurus, which speaks to that stubbornness that some find so troublesome. This office stands for the status quo, that which is known to all, dependable and unmoving. This often leads to resentment when one misunderstands the timelessness of this office. The thing to remember is that while the Hierophant is here to intercede on behalf of mankind, he is not compelled to devise or divine an exception to every rule to satisfy each individual's taste. Yes, we are aware that this office directs change at glacial speeds, and it seems we are often the last people on the planet to accept anything new. But this is the nature of tradition and dogma. Every new idea must be weighed not only on its merits, but on the effect it will produce within the community as a whole. The institution of this office is to provide a lasting, stable, secure place of refuge and retreat. Our door is always open in times of trouble and challenge, but there are rules to be followed, and our goodwill may not always be unconditional. We expect, and we even demand, allegiance and faithful adherence. While we will rarely deny the protection of this high office to any who seek its benefits, it should never be assumed that this refuge is offered completely without obligation. We would also like to point out that as Hierophant, we are not at liberty to follow our own heart and the whims of the flesh. We share this experience of humanity with all of you, and must daily reaffirm our commitment to the principles for which this office stands, and renew our decision as to the worthiness of our own personal sacrifice to enjoy the auspices of this office. At this point in the audience, we will take a moment with each of you for questions and individual blessings. Thank you all for attending this attendance with the Hierophant. And the announcer returns and says, on behalf of the Hierophant, we thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your attendance today. The ushers will now direct you to your private audience. And that is a look at the office of the Hierophant. In the second segment of the Oracle Scroll, we take something that is of current interest and find a spiritual way of looking at it. Sometimes this is not always easy. In our currently fragmented world, we have to choose how we say things very carefully, making sure that we are not becoming part of the problem and offering a viable solution. And that's a big issue for all of us in the spiritual community, myself included, is how do we promote peace? How do we promote love and understanding and compassion in this world when we're faced with such a wall of complete resistance? So I'm going to just go with an article that I called A View to the Future. And this was written year or so ago, but it's still extremely applicable. In fact, maybe even more so now. So here goes. June 26, 2015 was a landmark day for the LGBTQ community. On that day, the Supreme Court of the United States ruled that marriage is a right guaranteed to all consenting adult Americans. This was monumental. It was a monumental ruling for so many of our community, especially those in red states, the flyover states, America's heartland. For those of us here in Washington state, it was less groundbreaking since we had secured those rights through progressive legislation, which also went on to survive a forced referendum by ballot some 30 months prior. Many of us were already enjoying the benefits and responsibilities of marriage when we heard the news of the Supreme Court's decision. On June 27th, 2015, a friend who considers herself to be an ally but has absolutely no inkling of the challenges of living as a marginalized human excitedly asked for our reaction to the ruling the previous morning. My reaction greatly disappointed her when I stated, "It isn't over. It may never be over." During the months and weeks prior to the ruling on June 26, there had been many proclamations by evangelical leaders and right-wing politicians as to their planned opposition to the implementation of this ruling. Some religious leaders had even promised to commit suicide if it became law. To date, I am unaware of any of those folks making good on their promises. But several of their brethren have done as much damage to our community as their insignificant office might allow. Fast forward to November 8th, 2016, and the election results, which offered definitive proof that far too few of us valued our freedom and democracy enough to vote. The president-elect conducted a campaign that was completely based on fear, racism, bigotry, and hate. It was unprecedented in our modern history. In the process, he has threatened Muslims, Hispanics, African Americans, Asians, women, and members of the LGBTQ community. In the weeks at that time and the months now since his election, he has systematically endeavored to appoint those who will adhere to his policies of hate, division, and prejudice. Now, this gets personal. As a non-Christian gay man living with my husband of mixed race, I am concerned with my future in this new landscape. In addition to this, I also have members of my immediate family who are African American, Muslim, and less female. All of these individuals are at risk under the current climate of fear, hate speech, vigilante justice. Further complicating my position is the fact that I make every attempt to live a spiritual life and to search for the good in all while being slow to indict anyone. I find myself wondering how many rainbows, unicorns, and butterflies will meet an untimely end in our efforts to love these people into submission. We have already begun to see a dramatic increase in hate crimes across this country since November's election, and it is increasing still. While the violence may not have touched us yet, we are definitely involved and need to treat these reports as if they were happening to us, or next door to us at least. Like my friend mentioned above, we tend to only take notice when a certain injustice directly affects us or our children. We fail to realize that when rights are denied to any group in this country, it directly affects our own ability to survive. Resistance is our responsibility at this point. And recognizing that the leader is calling the worst our country has to offer to join his camp, he has littered the area with his henchmen to lead the cowardly charge in his absence. Like so many landmines of destruction, they will attempt to undo the structure of life as we have known it. It is up to us to be vocal and call out the injustices we see being inflicted on those around us, especially when it does not directly affect our family. Be alert to any opportunities to derail their efforts. Verify everything you are being told. Fact check everything and everyone. If nothing else, we can correct misinformation as it comes to us and refuse to share it any further. At this time, at the point that I wrote this, it was only 30 days since that horrible Tuesday, which changed the course of human existence on this earth. I have gone through many of the stages of grief within that time, and believe me, this article would have looked very different if I had written it earlier. I freely admit that I do not have the complete answer to this situation. But here's what I'm doing. I'm making every effort to shower the followers of this divisive bigotry and understanding, and I will always assume that they are speaking from an abundance of ignorance and misinformation. While I don't hunt for trouble, I will call out hate when I see it being expressed near me. I will not tolerate friends, relatives, or acquaintances who support this new regime of hatred, bigotry, and division. As I pointed out above, you are threatening my family and myself if you remain affiliated in any way with this mindset. Early on in the campaign, my husband said that maybe electing Trump was exactly what this country needed to wake up from its complacency. And in some ways, I think that may have played out to be true. But I shudder to think that he is right, and can only hope that this is as low as we need to go before we are willing to change. Looking forward, we cannot give up and let this hateful attitude become the norm. We have to resist and never give up in our quest for justice, for each of us, for everyone. In the third and final segment of the Oracle Scroll, we take questions from our audience members, and we, using the tarot, give them some guidance as to what they should do next. So today, I have a question from Robert. And Robert says, "My business is not growing, and I am struggling to stay interested, with one challenge after another. What do you see for the future?" Well, thanks, Robert, for the question. And in response to your question, I drew 3 cards initially on your question, and they are the 5 of Swords, the 4 of Coins, and the 5 of Wands. The first thing that jumps out at me right at the beginning is the presence of the 2 5s, the 5 of Swords and the 5 of Wands. The 5s in the decks indicate challenge, difficulty, and the 5 of Swords indicates that you are overthinking this situation and creating obstacles rather than workable solutions. In other words, sometimes analyzing goes too far and you actually create problems where none exist. The 5 of Wands indicates that the core issues are more complex than just adjusting your business plan. This card says to me that you are feeling trapped by the business you have and have long hoped for a new direction. This feels like an endeavor that you've been putting off for years because you can't see how to have both your livelihood and your passion at the same time. The Four of Coins, separating the two fives, says that you need to stay focused on what's working and avoid being impetuous, especially with your money. This card says that you are closer to realizing your dream than you realize. So sudden moves are not advised at this time. Now, I don't always, but this time I felt the need to draw a fourth card to help clarify the situation. And I got the Moon. The Moon is an insightful card in this reading, advising that you continue to examine the situation. Now, think about moonlight. It presents a very different view of the world than daylight. It encourages us to look deeply into the shadows and behind the curtains, because that usually is where our answers hide. So in summary, I hear the frustration in your question when you consider continuing the business as it is, and this is compounded by the fact that your true passion is really not being addressed. So I see at least two options, and I'm going to add, as you continue to examine and look deeply into the shadows as the advice of the Moon, you're going to find many more options as well. But the first option that I see is find a buyer for your business. This will allow you then to redirect your focus to the things which passionately motivate you. Your second option is to create a new company, or even a division of your existing company. Eventually, you hire someone to run the existing company so that you can focus and concentrate on what is really passionately motivating you. And as I said earlier, these are only two options, and I'm confident that once you really quiet the chatter of an overactive thought process, many more options will reveal themselves, open to possibilities. Most of all, you need to start viewing this as an opportunity rather than a burden. You need to recognize how energizing this growth can be and begin shifting your focus to align with your passion. I thank you for your question, Robert, and I hope we've been helpful. So keep us posted. And that brings us to the end of episode 7. I want to thank you all for joining me for this podcast, and I hope you're enjoying listening as much as I'm enjoying putting it all together. We are working on some big plans for the coming months, and we hope that you'll be with us for the ride. If you have questions or comments, or if you'd just like to send in a querent for our readers to address, then please address them to the Oracle's Scroll at gmail.com. Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Oracle Scroll. Find us on Facebook at the Oracle Scroll. If you wish to send comments, suggestions, or requests, please address them to the Oracle Scroll at gmail.com.